Welcome. So we are here to address the topic of living in challenging times, how to deal with sometimes extreme challenges, how to stay conscious when challenges arise. It is, of course, true to say that most of the time life is experienced for most people as challenging, although there are sometimes interludes when everything seems to be going very well, according to plan, good things happen, you can relax, be happy, perhaps you've fallen in love, or you're just getting married, or you got a promotion, you're doing well professionally, a child is born, happy moments, happy interludes. It's wonderful when things are going well in one's life, and it's to be enjoyed, of course, and appreciated. But the strange thing is that sooner or later, and usually sooner, something seems to spoil, to mar the enjoyment that you had for a while. There's always something that comes in sooner or later that seems to want to sabotage the things that are going well in your life. Some people take it even personally, and they think there's perhaps a God who has something against them, or they say life in general is treating me unfairly. Why is life treating me unfairly? Why do these things always happen to me? Why to me? Everybody else seems to be fine. Of course, that's a misperception. They may look fine if you look at their Instagram posts and what they post on Facebook. There, they all look fine and happy. But of course, as you may know, that's a facade. It's an artificially, mentally constructed image that people project into the world in order to get recognition, in order to get as many likes as possible, and then they feel strengthened and experience an enhanced sense of identity. They feel better about themselves briefly, and they may not realize that they are living ultimately a lie, that they are continuously projecting and living through a false, fictitious sense of self. Now, to some extent, that was already the case even before people invented social media and all those things. But this has now become amplified, the tendency to have a mental image of who you are and to experience life and other people and events through this mental image of who you are. That's me, my life, you say. What is my life? a narrative in your mind, a story you tell yourself, a story you tell others, something that you project. It's a role that you play unconsciously. It's a role that you've been conditioned to play. The roles vary from person to person, but almost everybody, unless they begin to awaken, become aware, awaken spiritually, almost everybody then plays, without knowing it, they play a role. It's the conditioning that they have experienced since childhood, conditioned by their immediate environment, conditioned by their cultural environment. So you become this entity, and ultimately, when you are unconscious, which means you're completely identified with this role, you are acting out a script. And if somebody lives with you, then they know that after a while they realize your behavior is quite predictable, because your reactions tend to be always the same, and what you say tends to be always the same. It's a script that you mistake for who you actually are, the conditioning of your mind. And so this entity, this mind-made sense of self that we could call the ego, is never happy for very long, and it tends to very much resent it when things go wrong in your life. In other words, when challenges appear, challenges arise, something that does not fit into the narrative of me. And so it is very common for people to complain a lot about their life, either mentally or out aloud, when things happen, little things that seem to sabotage, even the smallest things. You miss the bus, you're stuck in the traffic, you lose something, somebody doesn't turn up you're supposed to meet, all kinds of little things that tend to happen on a daily basis, and even that already, to the ego, that is something that is to be complained about. So the ego is not happy most of the time with where it is and what it's doing. And so the challenges that arise in people's lives, now let's for a moment use another word. Challenges has already perhaps a slightly positive element to it, used in expressions like rising up to a challenge and so on. But when things happen, it's usually something that feels more like what one could call adversity that happens in your life, something that's wrong, something has gone wrong. So this adversity, something that, that's related, the term adversity is related to adversary, and so it's almost as if you were facing an enemy in the form of a situation or an unpleasant person or an event that either is not happening but should be happening, or is happening but should not be happening. So you experience adversity on a small scale, and from time to time on a large scale adversity and small scale adversity. And that leads to suffering. The ego experiences it as unhappiness. So unhappiness arises in most people's lives almost continuously, with, yes, brief interludes, and then again something comes up that causes you some form of unhappiness. And the adversity, the different forms of adversity that arise, there are basically, one could say, three types of adversity. One is adversity that arises in your personal life, in your immediate environment, to do with the people you know, the people you work with, at home, at work, wherever it may be, or some kind of illness that arises, or financial problems, relationship problems, and so on. So adversity arises in your personal life. Then there's another type of adversity, and this is something that we want to focus on here in the next few sessions particularly, is adversity that arises on a larger scale in the collective of which you are a part. That is adversity that does not just affect you, but adversity that affects large numbers of people in your city, in your country, or even in the entire world. So that could be, whatever it may be, it could be earthquake, it could be a hurricane, it could be financial collapse, it could be a pandemic, very relevant topic at the moment. So suddenly, not only you, but millions of others are faced with the same kind of adversity. And those things tend to be bigger than the things that arise that seem to sabotage, the little things that seem to sabotage your life on a daily basis. So you're sometimes faced with huge forms of adversity. So we have those personal and collective. Sometimes the collective adversities that arise is so huge that you forget about your personal problems, because they are suddenly faced with you become part of a huge collective problem, such as suddenly, let's say, there's a war somewhere that comes into your country. There's civil unrest, civil war, or your country gets invaded, or pandemic, complete financial collapse, and so on. And suddenly you may find that things that you've been worrying about recede into relative insignificance. And now there's a third type, but the third type is an element of all the others. The third type of adversity that is extremely common is adversity, suffering, you could say, that arises in your mind as a result of certain types of dysfunctional mind activity or thinking. And that is very important to recognize in yourself and to ask yourself, in any situation when you're experiencing adversity, suffering, unhappiness, is there actually something here that is causing me to be unhappy, or is my mind creating the unhappiness that I'm experiencing at this moment? And very often the unhappiness that my mind, if it is your mind, is creating at this moment is some type of fear. That's a very common form of suffering that people experience, fear. So if you become more conscious of that, so you can separate what it is that your mind is doing from what it is that's actually an immediate problem in your life, you can free yourself from a significant amount of unhappiness by recognizing that at a huge, a considerable percentage of the unhappiness in your life does not arise from situations that you find yourself in, or that seems to be the case, but when you look more closely, you realize that actually the narrative that's arising in my mind right now is creating this emotion of unhappiness in me. Typical case is, of course, you wake up in the middle of the night and you begin to worry. Why, God, what's going to happen? It doesn't have to be in the middle of the night, it could be anywhere during the day too. You suddenly feel worry. What is worry? Worry is a certain type of mind activity. And usually it means you're projecting yourself into some future moment that is critical. Worry does not concern the present moment. When you have a problem or a challenge that arises in the present moment, you're not worrying about it, you're looking at it, and you may be required to take action, or you may look at the problem that arises in this moment and there's nothing you can do. And then, well, there it is. Worry usually implies future, projection into the future, which you cannot control. There's nothing you can do about something that you imagine happening in the future, and that makes it even more frustrating. If it were happening in the present moment, you could take action, or you could say, well, I'll just have to accept the way it is right now, that's how it is. But if it's something that your mind has created, there's nothing you can do about it. And so the mind projects itself and creates scenarios in which you find yourself, or people close to you find themselves, maybe your children, you imagine something happening to them, something happening to you, some kind of great loss that will diminish who you are, that will make your life unbearable. And it could be a big event. There's a problem of pandemic. What's going to happen to me, to my family? Is it going to affect me? Am I going to get ill? Am I going to not be able to work anymore? Am I going to die? And then you imagine yourself, these things happening to you. And then you experience fear. So it's important to realize that the fear is not created by the situation. If you look at it really closely, the fear is created by the mind activity, by unconscious mind activity. When I say unconscious mind activity, by that I mean you're completely identified with the conditioned mind and what the mind does. You're in the grip of certain types of thinking. And this type of thinking, and if it's worry, it creates an emotion that you experience in the body. This emotion is anxiety, fear. You can feel it in your stomach often. You can feel a contraction in your energy field. You might even feel that the palms of your hand become moist. It's a sign of extreme nervousness or anxiety. All kinds of things. If that kind of emotion is actually very harmful to the body. Even mainstream medicine now recognizes that people who frequently experience the emotion of fear, anxiety, stress, have a greatly reduced immune system. It affects the entire functioning of your body. It interferes with the otherwise harmonious functioning of your body. And the paradox is, the irony is, the sad irony is, very often that which you fear continuously, you tend to attract. So in the case of illness, one can see it more clearly. If you continuously worry about illness and you see yourself falling prey to some virus, and continuously we have this mental image. First of all, the emotion that goes with it weakens your immune system. And also there's something else, that the mental image of yourself as suffering from an illness tends to create that the mind is a very powerful creative instrument. So the mind is capable of creating something that it projects into the world on a regular basis. So you're more likely, not only because your immune system has been weakened, but also because you're projecting yourself as a person suffering from an illness, you're more likely to experience it in reality. So it's actually quite dangerous. I'm not saying that will necessarily happen, but it is more likely to happen. And I'm also not saying that when you don't have this mental image of yourself being ill, that you cannot fall ill at all. There are many other factors involved, but this is one important factor. So you experience fear, and that's a very unpleasant emotion. The fear is, as I said, experienced in the body, and the reason why the body is experiencing this emotion is that the body, which has its own intelligence, the body is pervaded with intelligence that coordinates the countless functions that every organ, every cell cooperates with the totality of the body. And there's a vast intelligence that underlies the functioning of the body. This intelligence, although it is actually cannot tell the difference between something that's happening actually in reality and something that's happening only in your mind. And that's the reason why you experience fear. The body believes that when you worry, which means you're experiencing critical situations in your mind, you find yourself in this narrative. The body cannot tell the difference between the reality or just a mental creation. So the body reacts as if what you're imagining were reality, so it experiences fear. If a challenging situation were happening to you at this moment, the body would also experience perhaps this energy field that we call fear, but there would be a purpose to it. You would need this heightened energy in order to take action, so it wouldn't be trapped, or that it is possible that fear can paralyze you. But potentially, when you're faced with a situation, then you need an influx of surplus energy, and then fear has a place. It's not psychological fear. It is something that enables you to do something, to run, to remove yourself, or to fight. Fight or flight is the word. But when you're worrying, then that is not the case. There's nothing you can do. So fear is extremely unpleasant, and millions of people, majority of people, still experience it. And when things go wrong, adversity arises on a larger scale, either in your personal life or in the collective, then you experience even more fear than you would normally experience. And so the first thing is to see whether it is possible to reduce, if not eliminate, the fear that you experience, because then a huge burden would be lifted off your shoulders if you were able to experience life without, perhaps with no fear whatsoever, or at least with a diminished amount of fear. So that is something very important that you can work on. When you experience fear, become aware of your mind activity. What is your thinking? And you will usually find there's a mental projection into a future moment that's very bad. It could be for yourself. You might have the fear for other people, bad things happening to them. And the first step in becoming free of unnecessary suffering is to become aware of your mind, of your own mind. And then you will find that a huge chunk of suffering is produced by your mind rather than by the situation. And now, the first thing is to recognize that that's a fact. Now, this does not perhaps immediately free you, because the mind has a certain momentum. But you begin to awaken when you recognize that actually right now, here and now, in this moment in which I find myself, there's actually nothing to fear. And the weird thing is, that applies to almost every moment in your life. When I say every moment, what I really mean is it applies to the present moment. And what is the present moment? The present moment is the space in which your life unfolds, cannot unfold anywhere else. The present moment is the space in which your life unfolds. In the present, nowhere else. Everything unfolds in the present moment. There is never anything other than the present moment. Your life, what you call your life, is inseparable from the present moment. The present moment is the space for your life. It is the space. Even when you remember the past and even when you're thinking about the future, you're doing it now. And so, in the present moment, usually there's nothing to fear. Yes, there can be something that's going wrong in the present moment, a situation that is challenging, and you need to do something about it. And you do something about it. If a wild animal came into this room, suddenly the door opens and a bear comes in, it's possible that we would experience, and I would experience, a moment of fear. You go, and after that, enormous energy is released, perhaps, in order for action to happen. We can't predict what action that might be. If a bear comes in, maybe the best action would be to be totally still, or remove yourself very quickly, who knows? Or make yourself as big as possible so the bear gets afraid. That's what they recommend when you go for walks in the forest here in British Columbia. If you find a brown bear, it might help to make yourself look bigger than you actually are, and you go, ah. So you're taking right action. It might work or it might not. Maybe the bear will not be fooled by it. Maybe the bear will attack you. Maybe the bear will kill you. But this is a rare moment, that is a rare moment in which you're being challenged. Most of the time these things do not happen. Almost always when you look at the present moment, which the only thing there ever is, in this moment there is nothing to fear. Let's look at the virus, the pandemic. We know that it's affecting many, many people. But in this moment, here, you look, is there something to fear right here and now? I'm breathing. I'm looking around. I'm alive. I can feel the energy, the inner body energy pervading the body. That's what is right now. If you should find yourself with symptoms arising, that could mean that the virus has entered your body, whatever it may be, headache, sore throat, then you say, well, that is, it may be the virus or it may not be the virus. Then, of course, again, the mind may come in and say, oh, am I going to die? We need to talk about death in a little while, because that is an important topic that's connected to this. But even so, even when you experience the symptoms, if you could be focused on the present moment, then you experience these symptoms. And in addition to experiencing the symptoms, you can still experience the inner energy field of the body, because not every part of the body is feeling the symptoms. So you can feel the energy in your legs or your arms or your hand. And this is what is. And you come into a place of acceptance. This is what I experience now. It's a continuous returning your attention to the present moment, always. And in the present moment, most of the time you find that suffering or unhappiness or fear cannot survive in the present moment. And that's a very interesting realization. They cannot survive in the present moment. And so the practice is for you, when you experience fear, become alert, become aware, and ask yourself, what's my mind doing? What is the stories that my mind is what are the stories that my mind is creating right now? Or has been creating for the past hour, the past 2 hours, the past 2 days? And then you find, it had created scenarios, critical scenarios that are not happening, but could happen. And so then, yes, there is a momentum behind that. There's a momentum behind those types of thought. In other words, that type of thinking wants to continue in you because it is an energy field, and it's part of the egoic consciousness, the ego consciousness. This energy field lives in you. It does not want to go away, it wants actually to grow. It's an energy field that wants to persist and grow. And as you may know, it's possible for people to become completely absorbed in certain types of thinking. They obsessively think about certain things that are experienced as very problematic and awful, and they cannot let go on almost every moment of their daily lives. These are the more extreme cases, but it's not uncommon. Obsessive thinking. In other words, this something has taken possession of your mind. It's an energy field. It wants to grow. It's like a mental virus, not a physical virus. Many people experience a mental virus without knowing it, which means one thought grows, replicates, one could say, leads to other related thoughts. And then you have a whole a bundle of thoughts that are all related, and this bundle of thoughts has taken possession, and almost anything that you think of is then colored by this bundle of obsessive thought that lives in you. But you're so identified with it that you don't even know that. That is your reality. And that's an awful way to live, not uncommon at all. And in a minor form, almost everybody who does not have even a minimum of awareness of their mind, who is completely identified with their mind, experience that to some degree, some people to a much greater degree than others, to be possessed by certain types of thought in your mind, and you call it I. You're so identified with the thoughts that you call them me. You are this bundle of thoughts, and then who is speaking? When you speak, this bundle of thoughts, the possessive thought bundle is speaking, uses your voice. You are not even there. You are asleep, spiritually speaking. You are completely unconscious. You're possessed by certain types of thinking, which become part of your ego, your egoic consciousness. And then life becomes pretty unpleasant, because in most cases, in virtually all cases, these types of thinking are not happy thoughts. The obsessive thoughts are not happy. The obsessive thoughts are unhappy thoughts. I haven't yet met anybody who has obsessive thoughts like, isn't life wonderful? Life is so good. I can't stop thinking about how good life is. No, that's not an obsessive thought. But life is dreadful. Look what they've done to me. Look at that. Those are obsessive thoughts. Look at those awful people, whoever they are, or whatever it may be, whatever the nature of that thought is. It has taken possession of you. And then now we need to look at something else. These are not ultimately your thoughts. These thoughts, you have absorbed these thoughts from the collective. The hive mind is the collective mind, and this collective mind finds expression. Yes, nowadays you can see it more clearly than you could before. The collective mind already existed before we invented social media and the internet and so on. But now you can actually see the collective mind externalized in the internet and social media, and you can also see the collective mind externalized in mainstream media. And so when you watch these things, wherever you do it, on your computer, on your television, on your phone, you watch these things, and then you absorb certain thoughts from the collective hive mind, and they then cling to you, and they become part of the thoughts that live in you, and you don't know that this has nothing to do with you. You have linked into the collective hive mind, and then you express your opinions, but it's not your opinions, it's just certain thoughts that live in you. So awareness is missing. That which frees you from this terrible fate of being at the mercy of the conditioning of your mind that creates so much unhappiness. Awareness is the key that frees you from that. And awareness is the awakening of consciousness, where it begins with a simple realization that all the thoughts that go through your mind are not who you are. All the thoughts that go through your mind are not who you are. They are thoughts. How do you know that? Because there is the ability in you to become aware of the thoughts that are happening to you. Because that's what it is, they are happening to you. And then you no longer completely believe in the thoughts, you just see their thoughts. And then you can see very often, for example, as far as the hive mind is concerned, the craziness of many things that people say and speak about. You can suddenly see, a lot of what I see in the mainstream media, there's a lot there that's actually pretty crazy. The mainstream media then, and other forms of media too, on the internet and so on, are an externalization of the human mind. And they can also strengthen the fear that you would normally feel even without those things if you interact too frequently with those forms of the externalized collective mind. If you watch too much television, if you watch too much social media, if you interact too much with it, then a lot of the things that are a cause of unhappiness in your mind are then amplified by what you absorb from the collective mind. So you become even more fearful than you would be without all these, the social media and the mainstream media. You become even more fearful because they amplify what's already in you. So it's extremely important, especially at these times, that when you interact with the media, you become conscious of how unconscious most of these people are, and you can watch the news, but more objectively. You can be there as an aware presence, and then you see how much fear-mongering there is, how they indulge in sensationalizing, catastrophizing events, and they are not doing it on purpose. They can't help it. That's their job. They have to do it. They get more viewers the more they sensationalize and catastrophize and emotionalize events, and the more enemies they create, the more this unconscious energy grows. They don't realize, and the unconscious viewer doesn't realize, this is suffering. They're creating suffering, but they don't even know it. So you first of all, you need to reduce the amount of time that you spend linking into the externalized collective mind that you have there in social media and mainstream media and internet. And when you do interact, be very conscious of the fact that this is an expression. Ultimately, most of what you see and read is an expression of human unconsciousness, of the ego, the personal and the collective ego. So that you don't get hypnotized by, because it is a form of hypnosis almost, you get hypnotized by this type of technology and what is conveyed through it. Another interesting factor is when the hype that you experience, the fear that comes, the end of the world. It's the end of the world. There's an ambivalent there's a certain ambivalence in many people about the end of the world. On the one hand, they fear it, or some huge catastrophe. As you see in many movies, that these movies have been around for years and many of them are very successful. Movies that show all huge catastrophes, collective catastrophes happening to humanity. And so there's countless movies have been made of that. And people love watching these movies. Something draws them to the huge catastrophe. And yes, when it happens in reality, of course, there is an enormous amount of fear also, but there's an ambivalence. There's also an unconscious desire in many human beings for what we could call the collapse of the human-made world, because most humans experience the world as a burden. They have to live in this world, they have to interact in this world, but the world is problematic. The world has a heaviness to it. You have your job, you have the taxes, you have money, you have to do, and the world is complex and heavy, and there's an unconscious longing for people in what we might bluntly call the end of the world. And but ultimately, what they are longing for is, yes, it is a kind of liberation, but the ultimate liberation that they are really longing for is the liberation from themselves, the liberation from what they experience as their problematic, heavy sense of self that's inseparable from the so-called outer world. And so there's a longing in every human for that. But that's not going to happen yet. No. Any kind of adversity in your life, whether it's personal, of a personal kind, of a collective kind, the only way for it not to become converted into suffering is for you to go deeper and realize who or what you are beyond the conditioned mind. And the strange thing is that adversity is absolutely essential for the evolution of consciousness, although it seems to block what one could call perhaps the flowering of your life. It seems to, when you look at it superficially, all of the so-called bad things that happen to you, that go wrong, they seem to block you from fully being yourself, fully expressing yourself, being able to do what you want to do. And so this, what I earlier called sabotage, that is experienced as life or God or whatever trying to sabotage your life. That happens very frequently. But the strange paradox is, if the human being did not experience adversity, the human would not evolve in consciousness. There would be no growing of consciousness. And that's a very strange fact. But that does not only apply to humans, it applies to all life forms. Because every life form experiences difficulties, adversity. For every life form, life is not easy. Whether it's a blade of grass that's trying to come up, or a flower, or a fly, or a mosquito, or a fish, whatever it may be, every life form experiences obstacles, and the survival of every life form is precarious. Many life forms survive only very briefly, and then they're gone because other factors come in. It's gone. A sapling grows out of the seed, or the acorn, the seed. The sapling grows. The chances of a sapling becoming a huge tree are relatively small, because there's so many factors that could prevent the sapling from growing, and it would kill it. Lack of water, all kinds of insects could eat it, somebody could step on it, all kinds of things could happen, and yet the world is full of trees, so many make it and many others don't make it. But for every life form, its life is a challenge. If it were not, they would not evolve. So I'm sure the reason why certain animals can fly is there was a need for them, because if they had not been able to overcome gravity, they would not have survived. There must have been situations when they had to there was an absolute need to overcome gravity. Fish, they say, life developed first in the ocean before there was any life on land. Why would a fish that's comfortable in the water, why would a fish decide to suddenly start crawling on land? It would be silly. Why would a fish do that? A fish would only do that if there was, my theory is, there was a huge expanse of water that was gradually, over a very long period of time, diminishing. And so the fish could no longer survive in the water. They had to develop the capacity to crawl on land, and that was a huge transition. I mean, from being in your comfort zone in the water to suddenly being forced to leave your environment, and be in a totally alien, hostile environment. It must have been enormous pressure behind that to force that life form to make that transition. And when you look at a bird, the alertness of a bird is so wonderful to see. When you look at, I love watching birds, but they sit on a branch, and you look in their eyes, there is an absolute alertness. They go, it's just completely alert. And you couldn't just, well, some cats manage to catch birds, but you'd have to be very fast. You would not normally be able to catch a bird. It's about only very young birds usually fall prey to cats and other animals. Now, why am I saying this? Why is the bird so alert? Because it could not have survived, but it needed that, because if it had been a little bit less alert, birds would have been completely eliminated because they had so many enemies. There are many other animals who would only be too happy to eat a bird, and so they had to develop this extreme alertness, and they had to develop the ability to fly. It's miraculous. To the ability to overcome gravity, just amazing. But why did they develop? Because adversity. You had to. And so whenever and let's go to human beings, how do you grow a stronger body? How do let's say, okay, I want my body to be stronger. You need to exercise. You need to go to a gym or whatever you do. But what does that mean? Okay, here's a weight, and you have to lift that weight, or whatever you do. You're on a treadmill. What are you doing? You are making life difficult for your body. That's what exercise is. You are creating adversity for your body. That's how the body initially experiences it. It's not the comfort zone of the body to lift a weight or to go on a treadmill. And so what happens? The body experiences it as a form of adversity, as life is suddenly become difficult. But now what happens then? What happens then is that the body is making a demand in order to cope with the arising difficulty. It's making a demand for more energy. The body says, yeah, I need more energy. And out of that need, which is created by the adversity, suddenly you experience an influx of added energy in the body. And then actually it can become enjoyable to exercise the body. Why is it enjoyable? Because suddenly there is an added energy that has come in. And this added energy then strengthens the body. The energy would never have come if there had not been a demand for energy, a necessity for energy, because life was getting difficult for the body. So there's an evolutionary principle hiding, and just giving one example, there's an evolutionary principle hiding behind there that operates everywhere and on every level. Life has to become difficult in order for evolution to happen. Now, of course, quite often life becomes so difficult for whatever life form, whether it's humans or animals, life becomes so difficult that it kills you. That happens too. So let's not have some fantasy world and say that every adversity always is a great thing. It's not the case for every life form and every human. There's a saying, it's probably Nietzsche, the philosopher, probably said it. It's a famous saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So either it kills you or it makes you stronger. If it kills you, it's too bad. If it makes you stronger, it worked. But we need to look, not right now, but a little later, we're going to look at the deeper implication of the fact, what it means that this principle that's behind the evolution of life, what that means in relation to death, that sometimes it seems to cause death too. It not only causes the evolution of life, but it also causes death at the same time. To some die, some go stronger. What that means, don't want to go into detail now, we will speak about that a little later. Let's go back to adversity. Let's say a child at school is bullied, and so there's the child experiences suffering, experiences difficult. Life is getting very difficult. Now, what does the child do? It could perhaps try to learn some martial art as in order to be able to defeat the bully. So then the child goes to learns martial arts, strengthens the body again, and perhaps at some point is strong enough to defeat the bully, so it is not bullied anymore, but it has gone stronger through it. But on the other hand, this may not be possible. Perhaps the child has a weaker body, is much smaller, so it cannot overcome the adversity on that level. So it could happen then that the child becomes much more focused on learning, on focusing mental attention. So the child becomes much better at school. It compensates for the physical weakness by developing a stronger, more focused mind. And so then the child would not overcome the adversity on that level where it arose, but transcend that and overcomes it on another level. And then perhaps 15 or 20 years later, the child that was always bullied but developed mental strength will then employ the person who bullied him to wash his car once a week because he doesn't have a job, because he only got physical strength. And just to see, it forces you to develop more strength. This is what it is a demand. Now, what it forces you to do, this adversity, it forces you to demand more energy. The energy can be, there's only one energy in the entire universe. It can be at different vibrational frequencies. It can be physical energy that increases as a response to adversity. It can be the mental energy that increases as a response to adversity. Or it can be consciousness that grows as a response to adversity. And then that is how humans awaken spiritually, their consciousness awakens also usually as a result of experiencing adversity in their lives. There's a famous Latin saying that goes back 2,000 years, possibly a saying that was written by Seneca, the Roman author, and the famous saying is per aspera ad astra, which translates as through adversity to the stars. Per aspera ad astra. And so there's a deep wisdom in that. There's somebody there, Seneca, I suppose, must have recognized the role of the vital function of adversity in the development of human beings and ultimately in the development of human consciousness. So to awaken spiritually, often, in most cases, humans awaken spiritually through suffering, which is encountering adversity. That's an amazing realization. There must have been some intuitive knowledge of that in going back thousands of years, because in many ancient cultures all over the world, they had initiation rituals that normally adolescents, sometimes also other age groups, but normally the adolescent, the transition from childhood to adulthood, all over the world, Africa, Australia, South America, Europe, everywhere these ancient cultures developed for the adolescent, the one who goes from childhood to adulthood, develop initiation rituals. Now, every initiation, there are countless forms of initiation rituals, but every initiation ritual was confronting this young person. Often they were done for men, but sometimes also for women, confronting the young person with a huge difficulty, a huge form of adversity, like you have to go into the forest and survive there with nothing for several days, confront a dangerous animal, take hallucinogenics, and sometimes it would involve injury of the body, extreme forms of pain, something that nowadays you would say, if somebody did that to an adult, to a young person, they would put them in. People doing that to them, they would go to prison for 30 years. They would say this is child torture, and of course, from our Western viewpoint, it is. But there's also a deep wisdom embodied in this. They realized, independently of each other, there's so many different cultures all over the world. There was an intuitive knowing that it is important for human to encounter adversity at this crucial age, so that he becomes a mature adult who has a certain amount of inner strength, rather than remaining a child into adulthood and behaving childishly even as an adult, without not having been forced to go deeper by encountering the suffering. So this is initiation of extreme importance in all ancient cultures. Encountering a young person, and some died. Some died during initiation rituals, and that was accepted. It's very alien to us Westerners, when we, modern contemporary humans, to look at it. But I'm not saying we need to go back to that, but we need to understand why this was created and the function it had, and it was a very useful, very extremely necessary function. And after the initiation ritual, if the young person survived, she was no longer the same person, was no longer a child. There had been a deepening through encountering. Ultimately, it was always an encounter with the possibility of death. So, in a way, what the initiation ritual did, it killed the child in you. And so that it deepened to some extent your consciousness. Not yet, didn't lead to enlightenment or full realization, but there was a deeper human being there after the initiation ritual. There was a certain depth to you, and this is the case in many humans who experience illness, some great loss in their lives, or some other extreme form of suffering. Very often people have come to me and said, I understand what your teaching is now, but I only understood it after having gone through this suffering that I went through. Some say they became drug addicts, they became alcoholics, then they were led to Alcoholics Anonymous, and suddenly they were this huge difficulty in their lives. Suddenly it enabled them to go deeper, and there was an awakening of a deeper dimension of consciousness that is beyond the ego, because the ego, in the suffering, the ego experienced diminishment, sometimes even ego death, and that is why it is adversity is so helpful. It's the ego ultimately gets eroded by adversity. And there's a paradox here, because quite a few forms of adversity are created by the ego, whether it's the personal ego or the collective ego. For example, the collective ego creates the absurdity of huge warfare between nations. The warfare is collective, created by the unconsciousness of the collective ego. And warfare leads to extreme forms of suffering for human beings. And quite a few humans, through the suffering, deepen. And the suffering diminishes their egoic sense of self. If it doesn't completely eliminate the ego, at least there is a diminishment of the ego, and then there's a certain depth to that human being. The worst thing for any human being would be to be prevented from encountering adversity throughout childhood and adolescence, into adolescence. As some parents try to do that. They say you have to protect the child from all possible forms of adversity or difficulty or suffering. This sometimes is the case with children born into very wealthy family. So they can have anything and they just express a desire and the parents say, yeah, you can have it. No, I want this. Yeah, sure, okay, have it. We want you to be happy, so you can have what you want. We want you to have a happy, fulfilled life. And so the child reaches the age of 17. They never encountered any obstacle, any adversity, and this adolescent now has an ego that is entitled, completely unaware of the needs of other humans, completely devoid of any form of empathy with other human beings, completely unable to understand other human beings, to feel their other people's emotions, totally self-centered, completely superficial, never having experienced any that actions have consequences. And so you have a very low level functioning human being, because this human being has never encountered adversity in their lives. And then, paradoxically, because it's not possible for a human being to go through life without encountering adversity, if that happens, then the very fact that this human being has never encountered adversity becomes this human being's greatest form of adversity. He becomes his or her own worst enemy and creates many, whatever relationship they have ends in disaster. They make everybody unhappy around them. Every relationship becomes an unhappy relationship. So that's there was a knowledge of that in the old 19th century England and early 20th century. I just happen to remember I was talking to, a long time ago, when I was in my 20s in London, I was talking to a man who was very much upper, so-called upper class, wealthy, going back many generations of being wealthy and high social class. And he talked about, he went to Eton. Eton is a private school, the most exclusive private school in England, which is called public school, but it's a private school. And he was saying, that was in the 50s, life was very harsh in those public schools, private schools. They were freezing, they had sometimes not enough to eat, they were forced to go out into the fields early morning to steal some vegetables because they didn't have enough to. They created an environment that was pretty harsh. It was not pleasant. And there was some, I'm sure it's changed now because we live in a very different energy field now. The reason for this is they must have realized that otherwise, if a child is born into a very wealthy family, that is the worst thing that could happen to them. So in order to counteract that, they created these exclusive schools, which were there to not only to teach you, but were also there to make you suffer. Prince Charles went to one of these, was much more extreme than that. He went to Gordonstown out there in Scotland. He was very unhappy. He said it was like living for several years in a prison camp, and it was horrible. But his father thought that that would be really make a man of him. It does not work for everybody. I'm not saying it didn't work for Prince. He's a lovely man, but he was very unhappy. But the reason behind it is that they must have realized that the worst thing for a child to grow up in is in an environment that is too comfortable, that meets their every desire, because they develop no inner strength. So here we come to when I was contemplating adversity yesterday, I suddenly thought of, I want to read to you, really it encapsulates it all. In the Bible, there's a parable by Jesus which goes like this, which really is about the role of adversity and how it can be experienced in one way or another way. So Jesus says, "Everyone who listens to these words of mine and does them," that's his teaching. It's a teaching about finding the kingdom of heaven, which is a dimension of consciousness that is within you. "Everyone who listens to these words of mine and does them will be like a man building a house, who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against the house. But it did not collapse. It had been set solidly on rock. And everyone who listens to these words of mine but does not do them will be like a fool who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against the house, and it collapsed and was completely ruined." So the house is You are the house. It's your life. The key words are here. Listening to his teachings and practice. Practice. Seek the kingdom of heaven that is within you, which means the dimension of consciousness that is beyond the mind, that is the spacious awareness. I've often spoken about it. Then this man who builds a house, he digs deep. Those are perhaps the two most important words in this parable. He digs deep until he finds the rock, the foundation. But what does that mean? He digs deep means he goes within in order to find that which is beyond the mind in him, in order to find the consciousness that underlies the mind. So digging deep is going deep within. You find that dimension that I sometimes call the transcendent dimension in you, and then your life is rooted in the transcendent dimension, which in this parable is compared to it's the rock. It's rooted there. Then you lead your life. Then adversity comes, as it inevitably will. And that's symbolized by saying, and the rain fell, the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against the house. Nobody escapes that. Nobody escapes in whatever form. It will come if it's not here already. The adversity, the rain, the wind, it beats against the house, the floods come. And mostly not just once in your life, they come a few times in your life. And the one who built his house on the sand had no inner depths. The house was built on the sand. So when the adversity comes, total devastation. It devastates you. And this is what it says here in the fool built his house on sand, it collapsed and was completely ruined, devastated by adversity, because it lacking the depth. You haven't found the transcendent dimension within yourself. And this is what all spiritual teachings are just about that. Find the transcendent dimension within yourself, and then the rains and the floods come, but they won't devastate you. There's something in you that is beyond that. There's still, yes, these things happen, but there's something deeper in you that gives you a permanent sense of peace and rootedness, even in the midst of turmoil, when turmoil is on the outside. But it's sometimes the case that even if you don't have it yet, it sometimes happens, often happens, that when turmoil happens in your life, it eventually drives you deeper to that dimension, because you have to go there, because you can't stand it anymore. You can't take the suffering anymore. You have to go deeper, otherwise you might kill yourself, or you'd be completely unhappy for the rest of your life, or complain about how unfair life is, and how this should not be happening to you. So find that rock, and so that your life is rooted there. And where is it? Well, it's in the present moment, by going deeply into the present moment. I already pointed out earlier that there's, in the space of the present moment, a problem cannot survive. Your sense of self, the egoic sense of self, the narrative of me and my problems that you'd have to think about, what's going to happen to me or what did happen, also doesn't really survive in the present. In the present moment, what survives in the present moment is your awareness, your consciousness. The personality or the person recedes. Yes, of course you remember who you are, and if you have to remember your past, and you can make plans for the future, but the personality of the person recedes, and you realize there's something else that's much more vital than the person. The person couldn't exist without it, is not separate from it. It's the very consciousness that gives rise, that enables the person to be, but is far beyond who you are as a person. It's consciousness itself. So, but the simple fact of if you become conscious of the present moment here, you also become conscious that you are conscious in this present moment. It sounds a little weird, but you can sense, if you don't remember your past or think about the future, there's what's left of you. What's left of you when you don't remember your past, and your future, right now the future is unimportant. There's only this. Who are you without remembering your past? What's left of you? In fact, what's left of you when you're not thinking really, you're just present. What's left of you is the presence. You can't describe it. It's a sense of beingness, a sense of aliveness, a sense of I am, but not this or that, I am. This being is a deeper dimension of who you are. This being is a transcendent you, that which connects you to the totality of all life, of consciousness. That is the rock described in the parable. That's the foundation for your life. So when you are rooted there, then whatever it may be, the pandemic, any form of illness, the adversity, yes, they still arise, but they're not transformed into these extreme suffering anymore. There's a deeper place in you where you're free of suffering. And there may be physical pain or physical discomfort, yes, that can still exist, but you're rooted in the transcendent dimension. That's the liberation. And that means, yes, challenges will still arise, but your state of consciousness is very important. What is the state of consciousness with which you meet any arising challenge? That's very important in determining how the challenge is experienced by you, or the adversity, the challenge, how you experience any arising challenge, whether it's financial loss or loss of a loved one, or illness, or financial ruin, civil war, whatever it may be, or collective pandemic, the consciousness with which you confront or meet this, with which you experience whatever it is, determines what it is for you. And the strange thing is, if you are present when challenges come, you are in that you're conscious that, and part of that is acceptance of this, whatever is in the present moment, then you do not amplify the adversity or the challenge. If you are reactive, you amplify it and it gets even worse. You can see that easily when you're confronted with a difficult person, because in many cases the challenge or the adversity in your life is a difficult human. That's for many people. They encounter life they experience life as difficult because human beings are difficult. And they say, for many people, most of their difficulties are other humans. And they say, oh, if there were only no other humans, I would be okay. But why does everybody have to be so difficult? Well, not everybody, but particularly this guy and that one and that one. Why do they have to be so difficult? Now, if you are reactive, a difficult human is usually an unconscious human. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know that they're creating suffering for themselves and others. They just can't help it because they're in the grip of certain forms of mental emotional conditioning, which is their ego. So they can't help it. They don't know. But if you react against it, you amplify the unconsciousness, and the difficult person becomes even more difficult. And then the difficult person triggers your own unconsciousness. And then you have a huge situation. It didn't have to be, but it blew up into a huge confrontation, drama. Didn't have to be, but your unconscious, your reaction amplified the unconsciousness. And that can even happen when you experience an illness. If it leads to an extreme reaction of fear, or even the feeling that you need to fight the illness. When you fight something, you usually make it stronger. You give it added energy. Illness is best transcended by not developing the idea that you are suffering from an illness, but just be with whatever it is you're experiencing at this moment. Discomfort, maybe pain, maybe weakness, maybe in whatever form you experience this is what is. And then you come to points of acceptance of the isness of this moment. This is what I'm experiencing, rather than having this mental idea of your identity becomes the illness, and then you're fighting yourself. Acceptance of not the illness, but acceptance of whatever is you're experiencing at this moment. Then by accepting this moment, you already begin to touch the deeper dimension of consciousness in you. By fighting this moment, you get trapped in the form that this moment takes. By accepting this moment, you connect with the transcendent dimension. It opens up, or the transcendent dimension opens up by that acceptance. And very often healing happens by having access to this transcendent dimension in you. Then, So when accepting an illness does not mean accepting the idea that you are ill, that you're an ill person. It only means accept whatever symptoms you feel at this moment. That's fine. You can still take practical steps, medicine, whatever it is. So it's important to not make sickness into an enemy, and also not make sickness into your identity. Both are illusions. So when there is sickness, do not fight against it. Accept whatever you feel in the body at the present time, in the present moment. Do not accept the idea of sickness in your mind. Don't focus on it. Yes, seek help, whatever help is required, medical help, but do not focus on the mental concept of sickness and then begin to fight that and seek some kind of enemy in your body. The sickness is not an enemy. A very powerful healing is initiated when you accept whatever you experience within you at this moment. Surrender to what is, not to the idea of illness, and don't fight a perceived enemy in your body. That is not helpful. Surrender to whatever it is you feel right now. And in that act of surrender or acceptance, something deeper opens up, which is the unconditioned consciousness, the essence of who you are. And if healing is to happen, it will happen much more easily. And if healing does not happen, that's fine too. When you realize your essence identity as consciousness, then the fear of death begins to dissolve, because you're able to sense that in you which is beyond death. It is no longer a belief, but you cannot find it if you're fighting something within yourself. That within you that is beyond death is, in Buddhism, is sometimes called Amaravati, which translates as the deathless realm. And Jesus speaks of it and calls it eternal life. In some Bibles, mistranslated as never-ending life. Eternal means timeless. So Buddhism speaks of the deathless realm, which is a negative term, no death. Jesus speaks of eternal life, which is a positive term. They both point to the same reality, which is a dimension of consciousness within you that opens up when you accept this moment as it is.